The scalpel cut into the child's throat at 3:47 in the morning. There was no anesthesia, no surgical lamp, only the trembling glow of a single candle and the hands of a woman the entire town called a witch. But Eleanor Blackwood was no witch. She was a physician, one of the first female surgeons in the United States of America. And the reason she was cutting into a 2-year-old boy's windpipe inside a filthy horse stable in the savage mountains of Montana Territory traced back to a secret that could get her hanged. This is the true story of a woman who saved an entire town from death while she herself was being hunted like a criminal. A story of love that bloomed between blizzards and plague. And a story of a man who had to choose between the law and his conscience, between safety and doing what was right. But before you learn how she saved them, you need to understand why she had to run. And that story begins 6 months earlier on a train racing west through the darkness. September 1887, somewhere in Nebraska. The woman sitting in the corner of the third-class car was not who she claimed to be. Eleanor Hartwell pressed her back against the worn wooden seat, her fingers clutching the carpet-bag on her lap with white-knuckled desperation. She was the portrait of a woman fleeing something terrible. Dark circles carved hollows beneath her eyes, her shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against an invisible blow. Every few minutes her gaze darted to the window, searching the darkness for pursuers that existed only in her mind, or so she hoped. The train rattled through the Nebraska night cornfields, rushing past like waves of shadow. Each mile carried her further from Boston, further from the life she had built, further from the trap that Dr. Edmund Shaw had set for her with surgical precision. She did not know that the man hunting her was not on this train. He was back in Boston, holding a wanted poster with her face on it, and he had already sent telegrams to every train station west of the Mississippi. The warrant charged her with manslaughter and practicing medicine without a license. The penalty, if convicted, was death by hanging. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the wheels carry her back to the night everything shattered. 3 weeks ago, Boston, St. Jude's Charity Hospital. The operating theater smelled of carbolic acid and fear. Oil lamps cast wavering shadows across the walls as Dr. Edmund Shaw stood over the unconscious body of a 14-year-old boy. The patient was Nathaniel Morrison, son of Senator William Morrison, a routine appendectomy that should have taken 40 minutes. But there was nothing routine about Dr. Shaw that night. Eleanor had smelled the whiskey on his breath the moment he entered the theater. She had seen the tremor in his hands as he reached for the scalpel. She had known with the certainty that comes from years of watching and learning that something terrible was about to happen. She was his assistant, his shadow, the woman who performed half his surgeries while he took all the credit because the law said a female could not practice medicine. She had learned to accept this arrangement. Her father had taught her that saving lives mattered more than recognition, but her father had never warned her about nights like this. Dr. Shaw's hand wavered over the boy's abdomen. The scalpel caught the lamplight. "Miss Hartwell." Shaw's voice was thick, his words slightly slurred. "Hold the lamp higher." Eleanor raised the lamp, and in that moment of illumination, she saw what Shaw could not see. The blade was angled wrong. Instead of approaching the appendix, it was heading directly toward the abdominal aorta. "Doctor, please wait." Too late. The scalpel plunged down. Blood erupted from the incision like a fountain spraying across Shaw's white coat, spattering Eleanor's face with warm crimson droplets. The boy convulsed once, twice, then went still. In that operating room, Eleanor was the only person who could have saved Nathaniel Morrison. She knew the anatomy. She had the skill. But she was also the only person who would be blamed for his death. Because in the world of 1887, a woman's word meant nothing against a licensed physician. Shaw had stared at her with wild, desperate eyes. His face had gone pale beneath the blood. And then, before Eleanor could speak, before she could explain, before she could do anything at all, he had pointed his trembling finger directly at her chest. "She did this." His voice rose to a shriek. "She grabbed the scalpel from my hand. She killed him." The nurses had believed him. The hospital administrator had believed him. Senator Morrison, arriving 20 minutes later to find his only son dead on the operating table, had believed him. No one had believed Eleanor. She had fled that night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the leather roll of surgical instruments her father had given her the day she graduated from medical school. Unofficially, of course. No medical school in America admitted women, but James Hartwell had taught his daughter everything he knew, and she had absorbed it like a sponge absorbs water. Now those instruments were all she had left of him. Eleanor opened her eyes. The train had slowed. Through the window she could see the first gray light of dawn creeping over the plains. She looked down at the crumpled newspaper advertisement in her hand. She had found it on a train platform in Chicago, discarded beneath a bench like trash. Wife wanted. Sound mind, strong back, no questions asked. S. Blackwood, Montana Territory. No questions asked. That was all Eleanor needed to hear. She did not know that the man who had placed this advertisement had his own secrets. She did not know that he had witnessed 23 of his fellow soldiers die in a single night at Gettysburg. She did not know that he had buried his wife and infant son beneath a pine tree behind his cabin and had sworn never to let anyone into his heart again. She did not know any of this, but she was about to find out. The town of Copper Ridge emerged from the Montana wilderness like a wound on the flesh of the mountains. Eleanor stepped down from the hired carriage, and her boots immediately sank 2 inches into mud the color of dried blood. The soil here was saturated with copper ore, staining everything it touched with rust-colored residue that looked disturbingly like old wounds. She stood in the middle of what passed for a main street and surveyed her new home. Copper Ridge was not a town in any proper sense. It was a scar left behind by greed. Born during the copper rush of 1882, it was now slowly dying as the ore veins depleted and the price of copper fell. The population fluctuated between 200 and 500 souls, depending on the season and the market. A saloon with broken windows dominated one side of the street. A general store with dust-caked displays occupied the other. Between them huddled a blacksmith's forge, a ramshackle boarding house, and a dozen shanties that looked like they might collapse in a strong wind. The people were worse than the buildings. Miners shuffled past with hollow eyes and hacking coughs. Women clutched shawls around thin shoulders and hurried their children indoors. Everyone moved with the defeated posture of people who had stopped hoping for better. Eleanor had seen poverty before. Boston had its slums, its tenements, its forgotten corners where the poor lived and died without notice. But this was different. This was the edge of civilization itself, a place where the rules of polite society simply did not apply. "You the one for Blackwood." The voice sounded like gravel being ground beneath wagon wheels. Eleanor turned. The man standing before her was terrifying. He towered over 6 feet tall with shoulders as wide as a barn door. He wore a coat made of bear hide that still carried the faint musk of the animal. A black beard covered most of his face, leaving only his eyes visible. Those eyes stopped Eleanor's breath. They were blue, not the gentle blue of summer sky, but the hard, cold blue of glacier ice. Eyes that had seen too much death. Eyes that had learned to stop feeling anything at all. And yet, there was something else in those eyes, something buried so deep that most people would never notice it. Eleanor noticed because she had spent her life learning to read people to diagnose not just their bodies, but their souls. Behind the ice there was pain, immeasurable, inconsolable pain. "I am Eleanor Hartwell." She forced her voice to remain steady. "I am here to marry Samuel Blackwood. That's me." He did not offer to help her with her bag. He did not smile. He did not do anything except jerk his head toward a buckboard wagon hitched to 2 tired horses. "Put your things in back. We're losing daylight." Eleanor studied him as she climbed onto the wagon. She noticed things that others might miss. The way he held his shoulders slightly angled, favoring his left side. The almost imperceptible drag in his left leg. The faded scar tissue on his wrist, the kind left behind by rope burns. These were not the marks of a simple mountain man. These were the marks of a soldier, a prisoner, a survivor. Samuel Blackwood clicked his tongue, and the horses lurched forward. As they passed the offices of the Whitmore Mining Company, Eleanor saw a man standing on the porch. He wore a gray suit cut with expensive precision, a gold watch chain draped across his protruding belly. His face was soft with wealth and hard with cruelty, but it was his eyes that made Eleanor's skin crawl. He looked at her the way a hawk looks at a field mouse, the way a predator looks at prey. "Who is that?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Marcus Whitmore. Owns the mine, owns the bank, owns the town. Thinks he owns the people too. He looks intense. He's a snake." Samuel did not say anything else, but Eleanor saw how his hands tightened on the reins. She saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. There was history between these two men, bad history. She did not know the truth yet. She did not know that 24 years ago Marcus Whitmore had been a young lieutenant in the Union Army. She did not know that he had ordered the execution of a 16-year-old boy accused of desertion. She did not know that the boy's name was Thomas Blackwood and that he had been Samuel's younger brother. She did not know that Thomas had not been a deserter at all. He had been wounded and confused, trying to find his way back to his unit. But the truth had been buried along with his body, and Marcus Whitmore had built his empire on that grave. The ride to Samuel's cabin took 2 hours of bone-rattling silence. The cabin sat on a rocky ridge overlooking the entire valley, surrounded by endless forests of pine and spruce. It was small but solid, built of heavy logs that had weathered decades of mountain winters. "It ain't much." Samuel brought the wagon to a halt. "But the roof holds snow and the stove draws clean." He jumped down and finally looked at her directly. His blue eyes searched her face with unsettling intensity. "I don't expect love, Miss Hartwell." His voice dropped low. "I need someone to manage the house, cook the meals, help preserve meat for winter. It's a hard life. If you're running from something—" He paused. "And everyone out here is running from something. You best leave it at the property line. I don't tolerate lies." Eleanor felt ice form in her stomach. "I am here to work, Mr. Blackwood. I am not afraid of a hard life." "Good. Parson's coming tomorrow to say the words. Tonight you take the bed. I'll sleep in the loft." He walked away without waiting for a response. That night, Eleanor unpacked her meager belongings in the dim glow of a single candle. The cabin was sparse but clean. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner. A rough-hewn table with 2 stools occupied the center. A single bed frame with a mattress stuffed with dried grass sat against one wall. Above, a loft space was accessible by a wooden ladder. Eleanor found what she was looking for almost immediately, a loose floorboard beneath the bed frame. She worked quickly, her heart pounding against her ribs. From the bottom of her carpet bag, she withdrew the leather roll that contained her father's legacy. German steel scalpel, forceps, suture needles in 3 sizes, 3 vials of morphine sulfate, a roll of bandages, and a small leather-bound notebook filled with her father's handwriting. She opened the notebook to the first page and read the familiar words by candlelight. "Primum non nocere," first do no harm. But more important, Ellie, never let fear stop you from doing what is right. Her father had written something else on the last page, something she had never read because the pages were stuck together with age, a secret he had never told her before he died of pneumonia 2 years ago. But Eleanor did not have time to investigate tonight. She hid the medical roll beneath the loose floorboard and lay down on the bed, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling. Above her in the loft she could hear Samuel moving around, the heavy thud of his boots, the creak of floorboards. Then silence. Neither of them slept that night, and neither of them knew that their lives were about to become intertwined in ways that defied all imagination. The wedding was conducted the next afternoon on the front porch of the cabin. Reverend John Miller was a circuit preacher who traveled between frontier settlements, performing marriages, baptisms, and funerals. He was a thin man with kind eyes and dust permanently embedded in the wrinkles of his face. The witnesses were Samuel's 2 hunting dogs, Scout and Bear. They sat at attention, tongues lolling, as if they understood the solemnity of the occasion. "Do you, Samuel Jacob Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Eleanor Grace Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Eleanor looked at Samuel. In the afternoon light she could see past the wild beard to the strong jaw beneath. She could see the intelligence in his eyes, the competence in his bearing. He was not the brute she had feared. He was something far more complicated. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the Almighty and the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife." Reverend Miller closed his Bible with a snap. "God help you both, not God bless you. God help you." Eleanor wondered if that was an omen. The first 2 weeks of marriage were an education in humiliation. Eleanor, who could recite the anatomy of the human heart in Latin, did not know how to skin a rabbit. She burned the biscuits every morning. She scalded herself on the cast-iron stove every evening. She spilled soup, dropped eggs, and once nearly set the cabin on fire while attempting to smoke venison. Samuel never yelled. That would have been easier to bear. Instead, he simply watched her fail with those ice-blue eyes, then silently did the work himself. His patience was worse than anger. It was judgment rendered without words. But Eleanor refused to surrender. She watched Samuel's every movement, memorizing his techniques. She woke before dawn to start the fire. She practiced kneading bread until her shoulders ached. She learned to read the sky for weather signs and the ground for animal tracks. Slowly, painfully, she began to adapt. And as she adapted, she began to notice things about her husband. He woke at the same time every night, gasping from nightmares he never discussed. He kept a small wooden box hidden beneath his pillow, and he never opened it when she was watching. He read by candlelight every evening, not just agricultural manuals, but Shakespeare, Dickens, volumes of poetry. This was not the illiterate mountain man the town believed him to be. One night, summoning her courage, Eleanor asked, "What was Martha like?" The silence stretched so long that Eleanor thought he would not answer. She was kind. Samuel's voice was barely audible. "Too kind for this place. Too kind for me." "How did she die?" "Childbirth. 6 years ago. And the baby, also gone. A boy." Eleanor did not ask anything else. But later that night, when she heard Samuel climb into the loft, she heard something she had never heard before, the sound of a grown man crying. The accident happened on the 14th day. Samuel returned from the barn with his left arm held at an unnatural angle. His face was chalk white beneath his tan, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the autumn chill. Horse kicked. His voice was tight with pain. Just a bruise. Eleanor moved toward him instinctively. Her doctor's eyes scanned the injury before her conscious mind could stop them. The arm was not bruised. The radius was fractured. Possibly a hairline fracture, but if left untreated, it would become a complete break. The swelling was already significant, pressing against the surrounding tissues. "Let me see it." She reached out. Samuel flinched away. "I said it's fine, woman. I don't need fussing." Something snapped inside Eleanor. The words came out before she could stop them. "Samuel, look at the swelling. If you do not immobilize that arm, you will lose the use of your hand. The edema is compressing your ulnar nerve. Can you not feel the tingling in your ring finger and little finger?" Dead silence. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, a crow called once and fell silent. Samuel looked at her. His blue eyes narrowed with an expression she had never seen before. Not anger, something far more dangerous. Ulnar nerve. He repeated the word slowly. That is a medical term. That is not something a farm girl learns from an encyclopedia. Eleanor's heart stopped. She had made a mistake, a fatal, unforgivable mistake. I read it in a book. My father had medical texts. You are lying. The words fell like stones into still water. You are lying, and you handled my arm like someone who has done it 1,000 times before. Samuel stepped closer. Despite his injury, he seemed to grow larger, more imposing. His presence filled the cabin like smoke. Who are you really, Eleanor Hartwell? What are you running from? This was the moment of decision. Eleanor could lie again. She could weave another story, construct another deception. She had done it before. She could do it again. But looking into those ice-blue eyes, she knew it would be futile. Samuel Blackwood was a hunter. He survived by reading signs that others missed. and she had given him too many signs to ignore. "Let me bind your arm first." Her voice was calm, controlled. The voice of Dr. Hartwell, not the terrified fugitive. "Then I will explain." A long pause. Then Samuel nodded. Eleanor worked quickly. She washed her hands with whiskey until they stung. She tore strips from a clean petticoat for bandages. She found 2 straight pieces of kindling to serve as splints. Her hands moved with practiced precision. Reduce the swelling with cold compress. Check circulation. Stabilize the fracture. Wrap the splint with professional efficiency. When she finished, Samuel flexed his fingers experimentally. The pain was still there but manageable. The support was perfect. "You have hands like a surgeon, Abby." It was the first time he had used a nickname for her. That night, sitting by the fire, Eleanor told Samuel a carefully edited version of the truth. She told him about her father, Dr. James Hartwell, a respected Boston physician who had taught her medicine from the time she could read. She told him about studying in secret, about learning anatomy and surgery, while other girls learned needlepoint and piano. She told him about becoming Dr. Shaw's assistant after her father died, about performing surgeries in the shadows while Shaw took the credit because the law forbade women from practicing medicine. But she did not tell him about the night Nathaniel Morrison died. She did not tell him about the warrant for her arrest. She did not tell him that she was wanted for manslaughter. Not yet. "I could not stay in Boston." Eleanor stared into the flames. "Not because I was guilty, but because I was a woman. No one would have believed me against a licensed male physician." Samuel sat in silence for a long time. The fire popped and crackled. Outside, wind howled through the pine trees. Then he asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "Are you running from the law or from injustice? Is there a difference?" "There is. If you are running from the law, I have to send you away. If you are running from injustice—" He looked at her, and for the first time his eyes held something other than ice. "Then you have come to the right place. Because out here, the law is a luxury we cannot afford." Something changed between them after that night. Samuel still slept in the loft. They still maintained a careful distance, but the silence between them became companionable rather than hostile. He began teaching her to read animal tracks and weather patterns. She began teaching him about nutrition and disease prevention. They read together by the fire in the evenings, taking turns with the books, and slowly, so slowly that neither of them noticed, trust began to grow. 3 weeks after the wedding, Samuel and Eleanor rode into town for supplies. Something was wrong. The change was subtle but unmistakable. The saloon, usually rowdy even in mid-afternoon, sat silent as a tomb. Miners hurried through the streets with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Women clutched their children close and whispered to each other in frightened voices. At the general store, Mrs. Ruth Patterson greeted them with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. "Samuel," her voice was barely above a whisper. "Have you heard what old Pete McAllister collapsed last week, coughing up blood. Fever so high his skin was burning to the touch, and his throat." Mrs. Patterson swallowed hard. "They say there is something growing in his throat, something white and thick like leather. He cannot breathe." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She knew exactly what Mrs. Patterson was describing. Pseudomembrane, the classic presentation of diphtheria, the strangling angel. "Has Dr. Crane examined him?" Eleanor asked, fighting to keep her voice neutral. Mrs. Patterson laughed bitterly. "Dr. Crane is locked inside the Whitmore mansion. Marcus Whitmore has forbidden him to leave. He says the doctor must be preserved for essential personnel. The miners are on their own. That is a death sentence." The words escaped Eleanor before she could stop them. "That is Copper Ridge." Mrs. Patterson's voice was flat. "Welcome to paradise." On the ride back to the cabin, Eleanor's mind raced. Diphtheria was one of the deadliest diseases of the 19th century. The bacteria produced a toxin that attacked the heart and nervous system. The pseudomembrane that grew in the throat could completely block the airway, suffocating victims while they were still conscious. Without antitoxin, the mortality rate could reach 40%. In close quarters like the mining camps, the disease would spread like wildfire. Samuel, If this is diphtheria, the entire town will die. That is not our concern. But I could help. I know how to—" "No!" Samuel yanked the reins so hard that both horses stumbled. His blue eyes blazed with an intensity Eleanor had never seen. "Listen to me very carefully. You go down there, Whitmore will notice. Whitmore notices, he will dig into your past. He digs into your past, you hang." He paused, his jaw tight. "You are my wife now. I will not lose another wife to this God-forsaken valley." The words hung between them like smoke. Eleanor wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that she was a doctor, that saving lives was what she was born to do, that sitting idle while people suffocated was a betrayal of everything she believed. But she saw the fear beneath Samuel's anger, the terror of a man who had already lost everyone he loved. So she said nothing. But inside her head, her father's words echoed like a bell. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. But what about doing nothing while others died? Was that not a form of harm? The question tormented her for days. Meanwhile, in the mansion on the hill, Marcus Whitmore was making plans of his own. He stood at his study window looking down at the town he controlled. In his hand was a telegram from Boston. Eleanor Hartwell. Stop wanted for manslaughter. Stop reward. $500. Stop. Daughter of Dr. James Hartwell, deceased. Stop. Whitmore smiled. He remembered James Hartwell. 24 years ago, on a blood-soaked battlefield in Pennsylvania, Hartwell had saved his life. A Confederate bullet had torn through Whitmore's chest, and he should have died. But the Union Army surgeon had worked through the night extracting the bullet, stitching the wounds, pulling Whitmore back from the edge of death. Whitmore had never forgotten. He had tracked Hartwell's career over the years. He had learned about the daughter who studied medicine in secret. He had even considered once or twice reaching out to offer his thanks. But now the daughter was here, in his town, married to Samuel Blackwood of all people. The irony was almost too perfect. There was another detail in the telegram that intrigued him, a reference to military records from the Civil War, specifically a note about a patient named Whitmore who had requested information about a young soldier executed for desertion on the same night he was wounded. Thomas Blackwood, age 16, shot at dawn. Whitmore remembered that night too. The chaos of the field hospital, the screaming of the wounded, the drunk army surgeon who had made a terrible mistake. He remembered the decision he had made to protect that surgeon, the lie he had told to cover up the truth. Some secrets were better left buried. But now, with Eleanor Hartwell in town, with Samuel Blackwood stirring up old memories, with the diphtheria epidemic providing convenient chaos, perhaps it was time to tie up some loose ends. Sir Garrett Cole, his chief foreman, stood in the doorway. Cole was a massive man with fists like hams and a conscience as empty as a dry well. The doctor woman. Whitmore did not turn from the window. "I want to know everything she does, everyone she speaks to, everywhere she goes. And if she becomes a problem—" Whitmore finally turned. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Then we solve the problem. Permanently." 1 week later, Eleanor was preparing bread dough when she heard hoofbeats approaching the cabin. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. A young woman was riding toward the cabin on a horse that looked ready to collapse. She was no more than 20 years old, her face gaunt with exhaustion, her eyes wild with desperation. In her arms, she clutched a bundle of rags, a bundle that was not moving. Eleanor ran outside. The young woman tumbled from the horse more than dismounted. She fell to her knees in the dirt, holding the bundle out like an offering. "Please." The word was a sob. "Please, they say you know healing. They say you can save him. Please save my son." Eleanor took the bundle. Inside the rags was a child no older than 2. His skin was a terrifying shade of blue. His lips were gray. His tiny chest heaved with effort, but no air was reaching his lungs. She did not need to examine him to know what was wrong. The sound of his breathing told her everything. The characteristic stridor of a blocked airway, the desperate wheeze of a child drowning on dry land. Diphtheria, late stage. The pseudo-membrane had almost completely occluded his trachea. "What is your name?" Eleanor asked, already moving toward the cabin. Mary Dawson. My husband died in the mines last spring. Toby is all I have left. Please. Eleanor kicked open the cabin door. The next 60 seconds would determine whether she remained Eleanor Blackwood, anonymous mail-order bride, or became Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, wanted fugitive. She looked at the child, at Mary, at the door where Samuel would eventually appear. She thought about the noose waiting for her in Boston. She thought about her father's words, "Never let fear stop you from doing what is right." Put him on the table. Eleanor's voice was calm, commanding. The voice of a surgeon. Now. Mary obeyed instantly. Eleanor pulled up the loose floorboard. She retrieved the leather medical roll. She spread the instruments on the table, the German steel glinting in the firelight. Boil water. Eleanor pointed to the kettle. As much as you can. What are you going to do? I am going to cut open your son's throat. Mary's face went white. You will kill him. He is already dying. Eleanor met her eyes. The membrane is blocking his windpipe. If I do not open an airway, he will suffocate within minutes. This is his only chance. Mary stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Do it. Eleanor worked with the speed born of years of secret practice. She cleaned the scalpel in the boiling water. She washed her hands with whiskey until they burned. She found a small hollow tube salvaged from a broken pen that could serve as an airway. Hold his head. Eleanor positioned Mary's hands. Keep him absolutely still. Do not look. No matter what you hear, do not look. Mary closed her eyes and gripped her son's head like a vice. Eleanor said a silent prayer. Then she made the incision. Blood welled up immediately, bright arterial red. The child convulsed, but Mary held on with the supernatural strength of a mother protecting her child. Eleanor inserted the tube into the trachea. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then came the sound, a thin, reedy whistle of air passing through the tube. Toby's chest expanded. Once, twice. Color began to return to his lips. The blue faded to pink. The pink faded to healthy flesh. The child began to cry. It was the most beautiful sound Eleanor had ever heard. Dear God. Mary was weeping, clutching her son. Dear God, you saved him. You actually saved him. Eleanor slumped against the table, her hands shaking with released adrenaline. She had done it. Against all odds, against all reason, she had done it. Then the cabin door opened. Samuel stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. He took in the scene before him with one sweeping glance. Mary kneeling on the floor with her rescued son. Eleanor standing at the table with a bloody scalpel in her hand. The surgical instruments laid out like an accusation. His face turned to stone. What have you done? I saved a child's life. You have killed yourself. He stepped into the cabin, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Mary Dawson cannot keep a secret. By tomorrow every person in Copper Ridge will know. By the day after, Whitmore will know. His voice was barely controlled. Do you understand what you have done? Do you understand what this means? I had no choice. You had a choice. For the first time, Samuel Blackwood raised his voice. The sound filled the cabin like thunder. You could have let him die, like I let Martha die, like I let my son die. Because sometimes surviving means watching other people die and doing nothing at all. The words hung in the air like poison. Eleanor stared at her husband, at this man who had built walls around his heart so high and so thick that even love could not penetrate them, at this man who had learned to survive by becoming stone, and she made her own choice. Samuel. Her voice was quiet but unbreakable. You can send me away. You can turn me over to Whitmore. You can do whatever you need to do. She stepped closer until she was close enough to see the war raging in his eyes. But if you think I will ever stand by and watch a child die when I have the power to save him, then you do not know who I am, and you never will. Silence. Mary Dawson huddled in the corner, clutching Toby, afraid to breathe. Samuel looked at Eleanor, really looked at her perhaps for the first time, and something in his eyes changed. The ice cracked, just a little, just enough to let a sliver of light through. Then we better prepare. His voice was rough with emotion he could not name. Because the storm is coming, and we are standing right in its path. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, and in the valley below, the strangling angel was spreading its wings. By morning, the news had spread through Copper Ridge like the disease itself. The mountain man's wife was a healer. She had cut open a dying child's throat and brought him back from the dead. Some called her a miracle worker. Others called her a witch. But they all came. They came in ones and twos at first, then in groups, then in waves. Miners carrying feverish children, wives supporting husbands who could barely stand, old men and young women, rich and poor, desperate and dying. They formed a line that stretched down the mountain trail, waiting for the woman with the magic hands. And Eleanor Hartwell, wanted fugitive, became Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, only hope of a dying town. The cabin could not hold them all. Samuel converted the horse stable into a makeshift hospital. Eleanor worked 18 hours a day, triaging patients, performing tracheotomies, mixing medicines from whatever supplies she could find. She saved some. She lost others. The losing was harder than the saving. But through it all, one truth became increasingly clear. Without antitoxin, she was only buying time. The diphtheria toxin would continue attacking hearts and nerves. Even patients who survived the acute phase could die weeks later from cardiac failure. She needed the antitoxin that Whitmore was hoarding in his mansion, and she was beginning to realize that the only way to get it was to take it by force. The question was, who would stand with her when the time came? The answer arrived on a snowy evening in the form of an unexpected visitor. Dr. Harold Crane stumbled into the makeshift hospital with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands. His white coat was stained and wrinkled, his face gaunt with guilt and alcohol. He looked at Eleanor with the eyes of a man already dead. "You are the ghost doctor. I am Eleanor Blackwood. Why are you here? Why are you not treating these people yourself?" Crane laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. "Because Whitmore will not allow it, and because I lost the right to call myself a doctor a long time ago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I came to give you this, and to tell you something you need to know." He handed her the paper. It was old and worn, covered with official stamps and military notations. "This is a copy of a medical record from the Civil War. Gettysburg, 1863. Patient Lieutenant Marcus Whitmore. Surgeon Dr. James Hartwell." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Your father saved Whitmore's life." The words made no sense. Her father had never mentioned Whitmore, never mentioned any of the soldiers he had treated during the war. "There is more." Crane's voice dropped to a whisper. "On the same night your father saved Whitmore, a young soldier was executed for desertion. His name was Thomas Blackwood. He was 16 years old. Thomas, Samuel's brother, the one he never talked about. But Thomas was not a deserter. Crane's hands were shaking now. He was wounded, confused, trying to find his way back to his unit. And I was the one who—" His voice broke. "I was drunk. It was dark. I thought he was an enemy soldier. I operated on him and I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And when Whitmore found out, he covered it up. He ordered the execution to hide what I had done." Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Her father had saved the life of the man who was now her enemy. Samuel's brother had been killed not by firing squad, but by a drunken surgeon's error, and the cover-up had connected all of them in ways she could never have imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am dying." Crane's voice was flat. "The drink has destroyed my liver. I have weeks, perhaps days, and I cannot face God with this sin on my conscience." He pressed another piece of paper into her hand. "This is a map of the Whitmore mansion. The antitoxin is in the cellar, back entrance, old lock. You will find what you need in the crates marked with red crosses." Then he turned and walked back out into the snow. Eleanor never saw Dr. Harold Crane again. The next morning they found him in his boarding house room. Empty whiskey bottle, empty laudanum vial. Whether it was suicide or accident, no one would ever know. But his legacy remained. A map, a secret, and a truth that would change everything. Now Eleanor had to decide, would she tell Samuel the truth about his brother? And if she did, would he believe her? Or would he think it was just another lie? The answer would come soon enough. But first she had patients to save, and a plan to make. Eleanor sat alone in the makeshift hospital, surrounded by the sounds of suffering. The converted horse stable had become a cathedral of pain. 43 patients lay on improvised beds made from hay bales and horse blankets. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, carbolic acid, and the sour stench of fever sweat. She had not slept in 3 days. Her hands, once soft and precise, were now raw from constant washing with whiskey. Her eyes burned from the smoke of countless candles. Her back ached from bending over patients, performing tracheotomies, changing bandages, mixing medicines from whatever supplies she could scavenge. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the weight of what Dr. Crane had told her. She held the military record in her trembling hands, reading the words for the 100th time. Patient Lieutenant Marcus Whitmore. Wound gunshot chest cavity. Surgeon Dr. James Hartwell. Outcome full recovery. Her father had saved Marcus Whitmore's life. The same Marcus Whitmore who was now letting dozens of people die rather than share his hoarded medicine. The same Whitmore who had ordered the execution of Samuel's 16-year-old brother. The irony was so cruel it bordered on cosmic joke. But there was more. So much more. Crane's confession had unlocked a door that Eleanor wished had remained sealed forever. Thomas Blackwood had not been executed for desertion. He had been murdered by medical incompetence and then erased by military bureaucracy. And the man responsible for the cover-up was the same man Eleanor's father had pulled back from the edge of death. She did not know how to tell Samuel. She did not know if she should tell Samuel. But she knew that secrets had a way of poisoning everything they touched. And if their marriage was to have any chance of surviving the storm that was coming, it would have to be built on truth. Even if that truth destroyed them both. The door of the stable creaked open. Samuel stood silhouetted against the gray dawn light. Snow dusted his shoulders and melted in his dark beard. He had been out all night checking his trap lines and gathering firewood for the hospital. For 3 days he had worked alongside her without complaint. He had carried patients boiled water, held screaming children while she cut into their throats. He had watched her save lives and lose lives with equal frequency. And he had not said a word about the night she had broken his trust. Ellie. It was the first time he had spoken her nickname since the night of Toby's surgery. You need to sleep. I cannot. There are too many of them. Samuel crossed the stable and stood before her. Up close she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the deep lines around his eyes, the gray creeping into his beard. He looked 10 years older than the man she had married 3 weeks ago. I know you cannot save them all. His voice was rough with things unsaid. But you cannot save any of them if you collapse from exhaustion. Eleanor looked at the patients surrounding them, at the children wheezing for breath, at the mothers praying over feverish bodies, at the old men staring at the ceiling with the resigned acceptance of those who know death is coming. Samuel, I need to tell you something. The words came out before she could stop them. Samuel's blue eyes narrowed. The wariness returned a wall going up brick by brick. What is it? Eleanor took a deep breath. She thought of her father, of his belief that truth was always preferable to comfortable lies, of his conviction that courage meant doing the right thing even when it cost everything. Dr. Crane came to see me before he died. Samuel's expression did not change, but Eleanor saw his shoulders tense. He brought me documents, military records from the Civil War, from Gettysburg. Now the tension spread to his jaw, to his hands, to every line of his body. What kind of documents? Records of a surgery performed in 1863. The patient was Marcus Whitmore. The surgeon was my father. Samuel blinked. Whatever he had expected her to say, it was not this. Your father saved Whitmore's life. Yes. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. But that is not all. On the same night, there was another incident. A soldier was executed for desertion. His name was Thomas Blackwood. The name hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine. Samuel's face went white, then red, then a shade of gray that Eleanor had only seen on corpses. "How dare you?" His voice was barely a whisper. "How dare you speak his name? Samuel, please listen to me. My brother was a coward." The words were torn from somewhere deep inside him. He ran from battle. He abandoned his unit. He was shot at dawn like the deserter he was. I have lived with that shame for 24 years. He was not a deserter. The words stopped Samuel cold. What did you say Thomas was not a deserter? He was wounded, confused, trying to find his way back to his unit. Eleanor pulled the documents from her pocket and held them out. The execution was a cover-up. Samuel stared at the papers as if they were poisonous snakes. Cover-up for what? For a mistake made by a drunk army surgeon. Eleanor's voice cracked. Thomas was operated on by Dr. Harold Crane. Crane was intoxicated. He thought Thomas was an enemy soldier. He made a surgical error that caused Thomas to bleed to death on the operating table. Samuel's hands were shaking now. And Whitmore. He ordered the execution to hide what really happened, to protect Crane, to protect himself. Samuel took the papers. He read them slowly, his lips moving silently over the words. Eleanor watched his face transform as the truth sank in. First came denial, the slight shake of his head, the narrowing of his eyes. Then came confusion, the furrowed brow, the tightening of his jaw. Then came rage. A sound emerged from Samuel's throat that Eleanor had never heard before. It was not quite human. It was the sound of a wound that had never healed being ripped open again, exposing raw flesh to salt and flame. 24 years. His voice was barely recognizable. 24 years I believed my brother was a coward. I did not visit his grave. I did not speak his name. I let his memory rot because I was ashamed of him. Samuel, you did not know. I should have known. He crumpled the papers in his fist, then carefully smoothed them out again. When he looked up at Eleanor, there were tears in his ice-blue eyes. She had never seen him cry before. Whitmore will pay. The words were not a threat. They were a vow. I swear on Thomas's grave Whitmore will pay for what he did. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, trembling. We will make him pay together. For a long moment they stood in silence, hands clasped, surrounded by the sounds of the sick and dying. Then Samuel did something that surprised them both. He pulled Eleanor into his arms and held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had just crumbled to dust. And for the first time since their wedding, Eleanor felt like they were truly husband and wife. The next evening, Samuel gathered the people he trusted in Eleanor's makeshift hospital. There were 5 of them in total. Hank Fletcher, the blacksmith, was a bear of a man with 4 arms like tree trunks and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. He had served in the same regiment as Samuel during the war, and the scar was a souvenir from the same battle that had claimed Thomas. Jacob Whitfield was a miner whose daughter Emily had been one of Eleanor's first patients. She had performed a tracheotomy on the 7-year-old girl 3 days ago, and Emily was now recovering in the corner of the stable, her breathing clear and strong. 2 other miners' brothers named William and Robert Harmon completed the group. They had lost their mother to the diphtheria epidemic and blamed Whitmore for hoarding the medicine that could have saved her. "We need to get into the Whitmore mansion." Samuel's voice was low but commanding. "There is antitoxin in his cellar. Enough to save everyone in this stable and more. He is letting people die rather than share it." Hank Fletcher rubbed his scarred face. "Sam, I have known you since Gettysburg. We fought together. We bled together. I owe you my life twice over." He paused. "But this is suicide. Whitmore has 4 gunmen from Cheyenne guarding his estate. They shoot first and ask questions never." "I know." Samuel pulled the map from his pocket and spread it on a hay bale. "But we have something they do not. We know the layout of the house." He pointed to the cellar entrance. "Back door, old lock. If we approach through the forest during the fog, we can get in without being seen. Hank, you create a distraction at the front gate. Draw the guards away. Jacob, you wait at the rendezvous point with horses. Will and Robert, you guard our retreat." "And you?" Hank asked. Samuel looked at Eleanor. "We go inside together." Eleanor stepped forward. "You cannot both go. If something happens, the town needs at least one of us. The town needs the antitoxin." Samuel's voice was firm. "And I need you. You are the only one who knows what the medicine looks like. If I grab the wrong bottles, this whole operation is pointless." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. "I can handle a gun." She pulled the small Derringer from her medical bag. Another secret from Boston. Samuel looked at the tiny pistol, then at the fierce woman holding it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You are full of surprises, Mrs. Blackwood. You have no idea." Hank Fletcher laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that momentarily lifted the oppressive atmosphere. "I like her, Sam. She has fire." The firelight flickered across their faces as they finalized the plan. The fog would roll in from the river the following night. They would move at midnight when the guards were tired and careless. It was a desperate plan. It was probably suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. As the meeting broke up and the men filed out into the cold night, Hank Fletcher lingered behind. "Sam, can I talk to you? Alone?" Samuel nodded. Eleanor gave them space, moving to check on her patients. The two old soldiers stood in the corner of the stable, their voices low. "I never told you this." Hank's face was heavy with old guilt. "But I was there that night. The night Thomas died." Samuel went very still. "What do you mean I was in the hospital tent?" "Not as a patient. I had gone to find more bandages for my squad. And I heard what happened." His scarred face twisted with remembered pain. "I heard Crane screaming that he had made a mistake. I heard Whitmore ordering him to be quiet. I heard them talking about what to do with the body." "Why did you never tell me?" "Because I was a coward." Hank's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid of what Whitmore would do to me if I talked. Because I—" He stopped. When he continued, his voice was barely audible. "Because I was the one who tried to stop them. I tried to report what I had heard. And this scar, this is what Whitmore's men gave me as a reward for my honesty." Samuel stared at his old friend with new understanding. "They silenced you. They threatened my family. My wife was pregnant. They said if I ever spoke a word—" Hank could not finish. Samuel put his hand on Hank's shoulder. "You did what you had to do to survive. I do not blame you. I have blamed myself for 24 years. Then let us end it. Tomorrow night we take back what Whitmore stole. We take back the truth." Hank Fletcher nodded slowly. "For Thomas. For Thomas." Eleanor could not sleep. She sat by the fire in the cabin, watching the flames dance, her mind racing through all the ways the next night could go wrong. They could be caught before they even reached the mansion. They could be shot climbing through the cellar window. They could find the cellar empty, the antitoxin moved to another location. Or they could succeed and still be hunted down like animals in the days that followed. Whitmore was not a man who forgave, and he was certainly not a man who forgot. The door to the loft creaked. Samuel climbed down the ladder and crossed the room to sit beside her. For a long time they sat in silence, watching the fire together. Then Samuel spoke. "When Martha died, I thought I would never feel anything again." Eleanor turned to look at him. His profile was sharp in the firelight, his eyes distant with memory. "I buried her under the pine tree on the ridge, the one with the split trunk. She always loved that tree. Said it reminded her of how broken things could still be beautiful." His voice was rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I buried our son next to her. He was so small, he never even got to open his eyes." "Samuel, let me finish." Eleanor fell silent. "After they died, I made myself into stone. I stopped feeling, stopped caring, stopped living, really. I existed, but I was not alive." He turned to look at her, and Eleanor saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. "Then you came." Samuel reached out and touched her face. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle. You came with your secrets and your scalpel and your stubborn refusal to let anyone die on your watch. And you cracked the stone. You let the light in. I did not mean to. I know. That is what made it real." He leaned closer. "Ellie, if tomorrow goes wrong, it will not go wrong. But if it does—" His face was inches from hers now. She could feel his breath on her skin. "If it does, I want you to know that these past weeks have been the first time in 6 years that I have felt alive. The first time I have allowed myself to hope. Samuel, I love you." The words hung between them like a sacred thing. "I did not expect to. I did not want to. But I do. And if I die tomorrow, I need you to know that." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "You are not going to die tomorrow. Promise me. I promise." Then she kissed him. It was not the careful, formal kiss of their wedding day. It was a desperate, hungry kiss full of all the things they had been afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Together." They sat by the fire until dawn, holding each other, not speaking, savoring what might be their last peaceful night. In the distance, the first wisps of fog began to rise from the river. The night of reckoning was coming. The fog rolled in from Copper River like a funeral shroud, swallowing the valley in gray oblivion. Eleanor and Samuel moved through the pine forest like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by years of fallen needles. Eleanor wore Samuel's trousers for ease of movement, a black coat, her hair bound tight beneath a wool cap. In her pocket was the derringer and a small vial of ether, weapons of a different kind of warrior. The Whitmore mansion emerged from the mist like a crouching beast. It was built of gray stone, 3 stories tall, with windows that glowed yellow with lamplight. From inside came the faint strains of opera music, incongruous and obscene in the midst of an epidemic. The man who lived here was listening to Verdi while children suffocated in horse stables. Samuel's jaw tightened with barely controlled rage. They circled to the rear of the estate, staying low, using the fog as cover. Exactly as Crane's map had indicated, they found a small door leading to the cellar. The lock was old iron, rusted with age. Samuel wedged his pry bar beneath the hinges and applied pressure. The wood groaned, metal screeched. With a final crack, the door swung inward. They descended into darkness. The cellar smelled of damp earth-aged wine and sawdust. Eleanor struck a match, and the small flame revealed a space far larger than she had expected. Row upon row of French wine bottles lined the walls. Barrels of salted meat and wheels of cheese filled one corner. Sacks of flour and canned goods were stacked to the ceiling, enough food to feed the entire town for a winter. Whitmore had been hoarding while his neighbors starved. But Eleanor was not here for food. She moved toward the far corner where Crane had indicated the medical supplies would be. And there they were. 3 wooden crates marked with red crosses, the stamp of the Philadelphia Medical Supply Company. She pried open the first crate and her heart soared. Nestled in straw were dozens of amber glass vials. Diphtheria antitoxin, 1,000 units. She began stuffing the vials into her bag with shaking hands. 10, 20, 30. She did not stop to count. She simply took as many as she could carry. How touching. The voice came from the stairs. Eleanor and Samuel froze. Marcus Whitmore descended into the cellar, holding a candelabra in one hand and a heavy revolver in the other. He was not alone. Behind him came Garrett Cole and 2 more hired gunmen, their weapons already drawn. The mountain man and his witch wife. Whitmore's smile was thin and cruel. "I must admit I did not expect you to actually come. I thought you might send proxies. You knew we were coming. I have known since the moment you started planning." Whitmore reached the bottom of the stairs. "Did you really think I would not have informants among the miners? Did you really think you could outwit me?" Samuel stepped in front of Eleanor, his hand hovering near his knife. "We came for the medicine. Nothing else." "Liar." Whitmore raised his revolver, aiming it directly at Samuel's chest. "You came for revenge. For your brother. For the truth that Crane whispered in your wife's ear before he died." Samuel's face betrayed nothing. "What do you know about my brother?" "I know everything, Blackwood." Whitmore's voice was almost conversational. "I know that Thomas was not a deserter. I know that Crane killed him with his drunken incompetence. I know that I ordered the execution to cover up the scandal." A muscle twitched in Samuel's jaw. "Why?" "Because Crane was my friend from medical school. Because I had my own career to consider. Because in war sometimes you have to sacrifice pawns to protect kings." Thomas was 16 years old. Thomas was collateral damage. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. For a moment Eleanor thought he might lunge at Whitmore regardless of the guns pointed at them. She could see the rage building in his shoulders and his clenched fists, in the way his whole body vibrated with suppressed violence. But then Whitmore turned his attention to Eleanor. "And you, the daughter of James Hartwell." He laughed, a cold sound without humor. "Your father saved my life. Did you know that at Gettysburg? A Confederate bullet had torn through my chest, and I should have died. But Hartwell worked through the night to save me." "I know." "Does it not strike you as ironic? The daughter of the man who saved me, married to the brother of the boy I condemned. The universe has a twisted sense of humor." Eleanor stepped forward, her fear replaced by something harder. "My father saved your life because that was who he was. He did not ask if you deserved saving. He simply saved you." She paused. "What would he think of the man you have become?" Something flickered in Whitmore's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of a conscience long since murdered. "Your father would be disappointed in many things. Then give us the medicine. Let us save the people who are dying because of your greed. Honor the man who gave you a second chance at life." For a long moment Whitmore was silent. The oil lamps flickered. The opera music drifted down from above, muffled but persistent. Then Whitmore shook his head. "You do not understand, do you? It is not about the medicine. It was never about the medicine." Whitmore's voice hardened. "It is about control, about power, about knowing that every person in this town lives or dies at my discretion." He raised the revolver. "And tonight you die at my discretion." Samuel moved before Whitmore could pull the trigger. He grabbed an empty wine bottle from the nearest rack and hurled it at the candelabra in Whitmore's hand. Glass shattered. Flames scattered. For one chaotic moment the cellar was filled with fire and darkness. "Run!" Samuel grabbed Eleanor's arm and dragged her toward the cellar door. Behind them, Whitmore was screaming orders, but the spilled oil from the candles had ignited, creating a wall of flame between them and their pursuers. Eleanor clutched the bag of antitoxin to her chest as they scrambled up the stairs. They burst out into the foggy night. The cold air hit Eleanor's face like a slap. She could hear shouting behind them, the crack of gunfire, but the fog swallowed everything. "This way." Samuel pulled her into the forest. They ran through the pine's branches, whipping at their faces, roots grabbing at their feet. A bullet whistled past Eleanor's ear. She ran faster. They reached the rendezvous point where Jacob was waiting with horses. Eleanor practically threw herself onto Bessie's back. Samuel mounted his own horse in one fluid motion. "Go!" They kicked the horses into a gallop, racing down the mountain trail toward the safety of the makeshift hospital. Behind them, the Whitmore mansion was fully ablaze now. The fire had spread from the cellar to the upper floors, turning the gray stone building into a torch that illuminated the entire valley. Eleanor looked back once and saw figures running from the building shouting, trying to organize a firefighting effort. But she did not stop. She did not slow down. She had the medicine. She had survived. And she had a town full of dying people who needed her. Everything else could wait. They reached the hospital just as dawn was breaking. Mary Dawson ran out to meet them, her face a mixture of fear and hope. "Did you get it?" Eleanor held up the bag of vials. 40 doses, enough to save everyone. Mary burst into tears. "Thank God! Thank God!" Eleanor was already moving toward the stable, already calculating dosages, already prioritizing patients. But Samuel grabbed her arm. "Ellie, wait. What is it?" He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You were magnificent tonight. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the fear and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, Eleanor smiled. "We were magnificent. Now let me save some lives." She entered the hospital and got to work. For the next 6 hours, Eleanor injected patient after patient with the precious antitoxin. She started with the most critical cases, the children whose airways were nearly blocked, the elderly whose hearts were failing, the young mothers who had contracted the disease while caring for their sick families. One by one, she watched the medicine do its work. Fevers broke, breathing eased, color returned to gray faces. By noon, she had used all 40 doses, and then she sat down on a hay bale and wept. She wept for the patients she had saved and the patients she had lost. She wept for Thomas Blackwood, executed at 16 for a crime he did not commit. She wept for her father, who had saved a monster without knowing the darkness that lurked in that monster's heart. She wept for herself, for the girl who had wanted nothing more than to heal people and had instead become a fugitive, a thief, and now perhaps a target for murder. Samuel found her there, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He did not say anything. He simply sat beside her and held her until the tears ran dry. "It is not over," Eleanor whispered. "Whitmore will come for us. Let him come." Samuel's voice was hard as granite. "The town knows now. They know what he has been doing. They know who saved them and who let them die. If Whitmore comes for us, he will have to go through every person in Copper Ridge. You think they will fight for us? I think they will fight for you." Eleanor looked up at her husband. His face was tired, but resolved, his blue eyes warm with something that looked remarkably like pride. "We started something tonight, Ellie, something bigger than either of us. We showed these people that they do not have to bow to tyrants, that they can stand up and take what is rightfully theirs." He took her hand. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. Remember, together." But even as she said the word, Eleanor knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. Whitmore had lost his mansion, his medicine, and his pride. Men like him did not forgive such humiliations. He would strike back. The only question was when. The answer came 3 days later. Tommy Fletcher, the blacksmith's son, came running into the hospital with panic in his eyes. "They are coming. Whitmore and his men. 15 of them." Samuel grabbed his Winchester rifle. "Where?" "Coming up the main road. They will be here in 10 minutes. Eleanor looked at the patients still recovering in the stable, at the mothers clutching their children, at the old men too weak to stand. "We cannot fight them here. We will not have to." Samuel walked to the door of the stable, and Eleanor saw that they were not alone. Hank Fletcher stood outside, his blacksmith's hammer in his hands. Mary Dawson was beside him, holding her dead husband's shotgun. Jacob Whitfield had brought a hunting rifle. The Harmon brothers carried pickaxes. And behind them, streaming up from the town, came more people. Miners with shovels, women with kitchen knives, old men with pistols from the Civil War. 50 people, maybe more, all of them standing between Eleanor and the man who wanted her dead. "Nobody touches our doctor." Hank Fletcher's voice carried across the cold morning air. "Nobody." Eleanor felt tears prickling her eyes again. She had come to Copper Ridge as a fugitive, hiding her true self behind a mask of domesticity. She had expected to live in isolation, forgotten by the world, paying penance for a crime she did not commit. Instead, she had found a community, a family, a purpose, and now that community was standing up to protect her. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Marcus Whitmore appeared at the head of the road, flanked by Garrett Cole and a dozen hired guns. His face was bandaged from the fire, his eyes wild with rage. "Give me the woman," he screamed. "She is a murderer, a thief. Give her to me and the rest of you will be spared." Nobody moved. Samuel stepped forward, his rifle raised. 24 years ago, you murdered my brother. You let a drunk surgeon kill him, and then you covered it up. You let his memory rot in shame while you built your empire on lies." His voice rang out clear and strong. "But that ends today. We know the truth, all of us, and we will not let you take another innocent life." Whitmore's face contorted with fury. "You think these peasants can stop me? I own this town. I own the mine, the bank, the law itself. You are nothing. We are everything." Eleanor stepped out of the stable and stood beside her husband. "We are the people you exploited, the people you poisoned with your greed, the people you left to die while you hoarded medicine in your cellar." She raised her chin. "We are Copper Ridge, and we are done being afraid of you." For a moment nobody breathed. Then Garrett Cole turned his horse around. Not enough money in the world for this boss. One by one the hired gunmen followed him melting away into the morning mist, and Marcus Whitmore found himself alone facing 50 armed citizens who had finally remembered their own power. "This is not over," he snarled. "I will bring the federal marshals. I will have all of you hanged." He yanked his horse's reins and galloped away, disappearing down the road toward the smoking ruins of his mansion. The crowd erupted in cheers. But Eleanor did not celebrate. She knew that Whitmore was right. This was not over. Somewhere in Boston there was still a warrant with her name on it. Somewhere in Washington there were laws that said a woman could not practice medicine. And somewhere in Marcus Whitmore's twisted mind there was a plan for revenge. The battle was won. But the war had just begun. 3 months passed. The epidemic faded with the winter snows, leaving behind 17 graves in the Copper Ridge Cemetery and 43 survivors who owed their lives to a woman the law still called a murderer. Eleanor Blackwood had become something she never expected to be a legend. They called her the Ghost Doctor, the Miracle Worker, the woman who cut throats and saved souls. The stories grew with each telling, transforming her from a desperate fugitive into a frontier saint. She did not feel like a saint. She felt like a woman waiting for the other shoe to drop. The cabin on the ridge had transformed during those 3 months. What had once been Samuel's hermitage was now an unofficial medical clinic. People came from miles around, traveling through snow and ice to reach the woman who had defied death itself. Eleanor treated them all: broken bones and infected wounds, difficult pregnancies and childhood fevers. She delivered 4 babies in January alone, working by candlelight in freezing cabins while blizzards howled outside. Samuel worked beside her, learning to assist with surgeries, to mix medicines to comfort frightened patients. The man who had once built walls around his heart now opened doors for strangers. They had become partners in the truest sense of the word. But the shadow of Marcus Whitmore still hung over them. The fire had destroyed most of his mansion, but not his wealth, not his connections, not his hatred. He had retreated to a boarding house in Helena, the territorial capital, and from there he had been sending telegrams to Boston, to Washington, to anyone who would listen to his accusations against the criminal woman who had robbed him and burned his home. Eleanor knew it was only a matter of time before the law came for her. She just did not know when. The answer arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. Spring had come to Montana with its usual violence. The ice on the Copper River cracked and groaned like a living thing. Snowmelt swelled the streams into torrents. The roads, frozen solid for months, became rivers of mud that could swallow a wagon whole. Eleanor was in the cabin preparing bandages for a miner who had crushed his hand in a rockfall when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked out the window. A man was riding up the trail. He wore a long duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Even from a distance, she could see the glint of metal on his chest. A badge. Eleanor's heart stopped. Samuel was in the barn tending to the horses. She could call for him, could try to run, No. She was done running. She had spent 6 months hiding from a crime she did not commit. She had built a new life, found love, saved dozens of lives. If the law wanted to take all of that away, she would face it standing up. She walked to the door and opened it just as the rider reached the cabin. The man who dismounted was older than she expected, perhaps 55, with a weathered face that had seen too many hard miles and too many harder decisions. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they held a weariness that came from decades of upholding laws that were not always just. Eleanor Hartwell. His voice was deep and tired. "I am Eleanor Blackwood now." The man nodded slowly. "I am United States Marshal William Thornton. I have a warrant for your arrest from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. But she did not flinch. She did not beg. "I understand." The cabin door banged open behind her. Samuel emerged from the barn at a run, his rifle in his hands. "She is not going anywhere." Samuel positioned himself between Eleanor and the marshal, his weapon raised. "Easy now." Thornton held up his hands. "I am not here to start a gunfight. Then holster that warrant and ride back where you came from." "I cannot do that either." The marshal studied Samuel with those tired gray eyes. "You are Blackwood, the one who led the raid on Whitmore's cellar." "I am. I have heard stories about that night, stories about a woman who could bring the dead back to life, stories about a town that finally stood up to a tyrant." Thornton paused. "I have also heard other stories, stories about what really happened in Boston, stories about a drunken doctor who killed a senator's son and blamed it on his assistant." Eleanor's breath caught. What stories? Thornton reached into his coat. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger, but the marshal did not draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of yellow paper, a telegram. This arrived in Helena 3 days ago, sent from Boston by way of the territorial governor's office. He handed the paper to Eleanor. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The words swam before her eyes. She had to read them 3 times before their meaning sank in. Dr. Edmund Shaw arrested April 15, 1888. Stop investigation into unrelated malpractice revealed evidence of prior misconduct. Stop. New witness. Agnes Brennan. Head nurse, St. Jude Hospital testified. Shaw performed surgery while intoxicated. Stop. Shaw confessed to causing death of Nathaniel Morrison. Stop admitted falsely accusing assistant Eleanor Hartwell. Stop warrant against Hartwell hereby vacated. Stop. Hartwell cleared of all charges. Stop. Signed. Chief Justice Thomas Whitfield, Massachusetts, Superior Court. Eleanor read it again and again. The telegram fell from her nerveless fingers. Samuel picked it up, scanned the contents. His face transformed from suspicion to disbelief to joy. "Ellie," his voice cracked, "you are free. You are actually free." Eleanor could not speak, could not move, could not do anything except stand there as 6 months of fear and guilt and desperate hope came crashing down around her. She had been cleared. She was not a murderer. She was not a fugitive. She was just Eleanor. Marshal Thornton watched the reunion with something that might have been satisfaction. "The warrant is void, Mrs. Blackwood. You are a free woman in the eyes of the law." He paused. "But I am not finished here." Eleanor looked up confused. "What do you mean?" Thornton's gray eyes hardened. "I did not ride all the way from Helena just to deliver good news. I have another warrant in my pocket. This one is for Marcus Whitmore." Whitmore. The territorial governor received some interesting documents last month. Financial records showing systematic tax fraud. Witness statements describing the hoarding of medical supplies during a declared epidemic. Evidence of wrongful death. Thornton's voice was cold. 17 people died in this town because Whitmore kept the medicine locked in his cellar. That is not just greed, that is murder. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "What will happen to him?" "That depends on whether he comes quietly." The marshal's hand rested on the butt of his revolver. "I have a feeling he will not." Samuel stepped forward. "I will come with you." "So will I." Eleanor squared her shoulders. "He tried to have me killed. I want to see this through." Thornton studied them for a long moment. "Very well. But you follow my lead. No vigilante justice, no revenge killings. We do this by the book." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "By the book." But as they mounted their horses and began the ride toward Copper Ridge, Eleanor could see the conflict in her husband's eyes. Samuel had waited 24 years to confront the man who had murdered his brother. The book might not be enough. The news of Marshal Thornton's arrival spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. By the time they reached the town, a crowd had gathered in the muddy main street. Miners in their work clothes, women clutching shawls, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts. They watched the marshal ride past with expressions that ranged from hope to fear to grim satisfaction. Eleanor recognized many of the faces. patients she had treated, lives she had saved, people who had stood between her and Whitmore's guns on that cold morning 3 months ago. They nodded to her as she passed. Some raised their hands in silent salute. Others whispered prayers of thanksgiving. She was one of them now, and they knew it. The procession stopped in front of Mrs. Patterson's general store. "I need witnesses." Thornton dismounted and surveyed the crowd. People willing to give sworn testimony against Marcus Whitmore. People willing to stand up in a court of law and tell the truth. Silence. Eleanor understood. Whitmore might be weakened, but he was not defeated. He still had money. He still had lawyers. He still had the capacity for revenge. Standing up to him in a moment of crisis was one thing. Committing to a legal battle that could last years was another. She stepped forward. "I will testify. I saw the medicine in his cellar. I saw the food he was hoarding while people starved. I heard him admit to covering up the murder of Thomas Blackwood." Samuel moved to stand beside her. "I will testify as well." Hank Fletcher pushed through the crowd, his scarred face set with determination. "I was there that night at Gettysburg. I heard what really happened to Thomas. I will testify." One by one, others stepped forward. Mary Dawson, Jacob Whitfield, the Harmon brothers, Mrs. Patterson, Tommy Fletcher. Within minutes, 50 people had volunteered to bear witness against the man who had terrorized them for a decade. Thornton nodded with satisfaction. That should be more than enough. He turned toward the road that led to Whitmore's temporary residence, the old boarding house on the edge of town. But before they could move, a woman's voice rang out. "Wait." The crowd parted. Clara Whitmore walked toward them. She was thin and pale with the fragile beauty of a pressed flower. Her eyes held the sadness of someone who had lived too long in shadow. She was Marcus Whitmore's younger sister, and for years she had been invisible, overshadowed by her brother's towering presence. Now she stood before them, trembling but resolute. "I have something you need to see." She held out a leather satchel. "These are my brother's personal papers, financial records, correspondence, evidence of everything he has done for the past 20 years. Thornton took the satchel carefully. "Why are you giving us this?" Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "Because I am tired of being complicit. Because I have watched my brother become a monster and I did nothing to stop him. Because somewhere buried under all the cruelty and greed there was once a man I loved." She wiped her eyes. "He was not always like this." After Catherine died, something broke inside him. He blamed the world for taking her. He decided that if the world was cruel, he would be crueler. She looked at Eleanor. "But you reminded him of her. The determination, the courage, the willingness to sacrifice everything for what is right. I think that is why he hated you so much. You were everything Catherine would have wanted him to be and everything he had failed to become." Eleanor did not know what to say. Clara turned to the marshal. "You will not find him at the boarding house. He left this morning, rode up to the ruins of the mansion." She paused. "He said he wanted to see what was left. But I think he knew you were coming. I think he has known for days." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I am afraid of what he might do." Thornton's face hardened. "We need to move. Now." The ride to the Whitmore estate took 20 minutes. The mansion had been a monument to wealth and power. Now it was a skeleton of charred beams and crumbling stone. The fire had gutted the interior, leaving only the outer walls standing like the bones of a great beast. In the courtyard, a single horse stood tied to a blackened post. Whitmore was here. Thornton dismounted and drew his revolver. "Stay behind me, all of you." They approached the ruins cautiously, stepping over debris and ash. The smell of old smoke hung in the air, mixed with something else, something sharper. Gunpowder. Eleanor felt ice form in her stomach. They found Marcus Whitmore in what had once been his study. The ceiling was gone open to the gray April sky. The walls were scorched black. The furniture had been reduced to charcoal and twisted metal. But in the center of the room, untouched by fire or time, sat a leather armchair. And in that armchair sat Marcus Whitmore. He was dressed in his finest suit, the one he had worn to business meetings and political functions. A gold watch chain still gleamed across his chest. His hands were folded in his lap. In his right hand was a revolver. The bullet had entered beneath his chin and exited through the top of his skull. Eleanor turned away, her stomach lurching. Samuel stared at the body of his brother's murderer with an expression she could not read. Thornton approached carefully, checking for signs of life, though there could be none. Dead at least an hour, maybe 2. He noticed something on the small table beside the chair. A photograph in a silver frame and a sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. The photograph showed a young woman with gentle eyes and a soft smile. Catherine Whitmore, dead 12 years. The letter was addressed to her. Thornton picked it up and read aloud. My dearest Catherine, at last I come to you. I have lived too long in darkness. I have done things that you would never forgive, but I cannot bear to have you watch me hang like a common criminal. 24 years ago I made a choice. I chose to protect a friend instead of seeking justice for an innocent boy. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself the boy was already dead and nothing could bring him back. I told myself that one small lie could not matter in the grand scheme of things. I was wrong. That one lie became 1,000 lies. That one betrayal became a lifetime of betrayals. I became the monster that I always feared, and I destroyed everything I touched. Today, I watched a woman stand against me. A woman who reminded me so much of you that it hurt to look at her. She had your courage, your determination, your willingness to sacrifice everything for what was right. And I hated her for it. I hated her because she was everything I should have been, everything you would have wanted me to be. I am sorry, my love. I am sorry for Catherine. I am sorry for Thomas Blackwood. I am sorry for all the people who died because of my pride and my greed. I hope that wherever you are, you can find it in your heart to forgive me, though I know I do not deserve it. Forever yours. Marcus Thornton lowered the letter. The room was silent except for the wind whistling through the ruined walls. Eleanor looked at the body of the man who had tried to destroy her, the man who had murdered Samuel's brother, the man who had let 17 people die rather than share his hoarded medicine. She should have felt satisfaction, relief, triumph. Instead, she felt only a profound sadness. He loved his wife, she said quietly. That was the only human thing left in him. Samuel's voice was hard. Love does not justify murder. No, but it explains it. Eleanor moved closer to her husband. He lost Catherine and never recovered. I lost my father and nearly lost myself. The difference is that I found a reason to keep going. She took Samuel's hand. I found you. Samuel looked at her and some of the hardness left his eyes. Is it over? Is it finally over? Thornton folded the letter and placed it back on the table. Whitmore is dead. The charges against Mrs. Blackwood have been dropped. The evidence in his sister's papers will clear up any remaining questions about his crimes. He paused. Yes, it is over. But even as he spoke the words, Eleanor knew they were not entirely true. The legal battle was over. The immediate danger had passed. But the wounds that Marcus Whitmore had inflicted would take years to heal. The families of the 17 dead, the brothers and sisters of Thomas Blackwood, the entire town of Copper Ridge scarred by a decade of tyranny. Healing those wounds would be the work of a lifetime. And Eleanor was just getting started. 1 week after Marcus Whitmore's suicide, his sister Clara called a town meeting. The gathering was held in the Silver Pick Saloon, the largest indoor space in Copper Ridge. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls and crowded the doorways, straining to hear what the last Whitmore had to say. Clara stood on a small stage that was normally used for card games and the occasional traveling entertainer. She looked fragile and overwhelmed, but her voice was steady when she spoke. My brother did terrible things to this town. He exploited you. He cheated you. He let your families die when he had the power to save them. She paused, gathering herself. I cannot undo the past. I cannot bring back the people you lost. I cannot erase the years of suffering. But I can change the future. She unfolded a document and began to read. Effective immediately, all debts owed to Whitmore Mining Company are forgiven. Every miner, every farmer, every business owner who borrowed money from my brother is now free and clear. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Additionally, wages at the mine will be increased by 30%. Safety conditions will be improved according to the recommendations of the Territorial Mining Commission. Any worker injured on the job will receive full pay during their recovery. The gasps turned to murmurs of disbelief. Finally, I am establishing a fund for the construction of a proper medical clinic in Copper Ridge, a real building with real equipment and real supplies. Clara looked directly at Eleanor. And I would like to invite Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood to serve as the town's official physician, if she will accept. Every eye in the room turned to Eleanor. She felt Samuel's hand tighten around hers. I do not have a license. Her voice was barely audible. Montana law does not allow women to practice medicine. Hank Fletcher stood up, his scarred face fierce. Montana law does not know what we know. We have seen you work. We have seen you save lives that no one else could save. If the law says you cannot be our doctor, then the law is wrong. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. Mary Dawson stood up, holding Toby in her arms. The boy who should have died was now healthy and pink-cheeked, laughing at the noise around him. You saved my son. I do not care what the law says. You are a doctor. One by one, others rose. Jacob Whitfield, whose daughter Emily was now running and playing like any other child. The Harmon brothers, who had watched their mother die but had seen Eleanor save dozens of others. Mrs. Patterson, who had witnessed the entire transformation of Copper Ridge from a town of fear to a community of hope. All in favor of Eleanor Blackwood as our official physician, Hank Fletcher called out. 50 hands went up, every single person in the room. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Samuel. He was smiling a real smile that transformed his rugged face into something almost beautiful. I think they want you to say yes, he whispered. Eleanor stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was clear. I accept. The room erupted in cheers, and in that moment, Eleanor Hartwell wanted fugitive mail order, bride ghost doctor, became something she had dreamed of since childhood. She became a physician, officially, publicly, proudly. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood of Copper Ridge, Montana, 1 month later. The clinic stood on Main Street, a small building of white-painted wood with glass windows that caught the morning sun. It had taken 3 weeks to build, with every able-bodied person in town contributing labor and materials. Inside were 2 beds for patients, an examination room, a small surgery, and a storage area filled with medical supplies ordered from Philadelphia and San Francisco. It was not much, but it was a beginning. Samuel stood on a ladder, hammer in hand, preparing to hang the sign he had carved himself over the past 2 weeks. Every letter had been shaped with care, sanded smooth, painted in deep blue against white wood. Eleanor stood below, watching him work. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Samuel positioned the sign and drove in the final nails. Then he climbed down and stood beside his wife. Together, they looked up at the words that would define the rest of their lives. Copper Ridge Medical Clinic, Eleanor Blackwood, M.D., primum non nocere. First do no harm, her father's words, her father's legacy, now hers to carry forward. He would be proud, Samuel said softly. Eleanor wiped her eyes. I hope so. A crowd had gathered behind them. The people of Copper Ridge come to witness the official opening of their clinic. Their faces held hope and gratitude, and something that looked remarkably like love. Mary Dawson stepped forward with Toby on her hip. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Others followed, shaking Eleanor's hand, offering gifts of food and flowers, welcoming her not as a stranger or a fugitive, but as one of their own. When the crowd finally dispersed, Eleanor and Samuel walked home to their cabin on the ridge. The spring evening was soft and warm, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Samuel, Eleanor said as they walked, "There is something I need to ask you. What is it?" "The letter. Martha's letter. Have you read it yet?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. During the chaos of the past months, the letter had been forgotten. It still lay in the wooden box beneath Samuel's pillow, yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had never been broken. "I have been afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of what she might have said. Afraid of what I might feel." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You do not have to read it alone." They reached the cabin as darkness fell. Samuel lit the lamps while Eleanor made tea. Then they sat together by the fire, the wooden box between them. Samuel opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay Martha's wedding ring and the letter. He picked up the letter and broke the seal. The paper was fragile with age, the ink faded but still legible. Samuel read the words aloud, his voice rough with emotion. "My dearest Sam, if you are reading this, then I did not survive the night. I am sorry, my love. I am sorry for leaving you. I am sorry for the pain I know you will feel. But I need you to know something important. I do not want you to spend the rest of your life alone. I know you, Samuel Blackwood. I know that when you love completely. And I know that when you lose, you close yourself off from the world. Please do not do that. Please let yourself love again. Please let yourself be loved. I want you to find someone who makes you laugh, someone who challenges you, someone who sees the good in you even when you cannot see it yourself. I want you to be happy, Sam. That is all I have ever wanted. Do not mourn me forever. Do not let my death become a prison. Open your heart. Let the light in. I love you. I will always love you, but I am giving you permission to love someone else. Be happy, my darling. For both of us. Forever yours, Martha." Samuel's voice broke on the last words. Eleanor took his hand, her own eyes streaming with tears. She knew Samuel whispered. She knew what I would become. She tried to warn me. She loved you. She loved me enough to let me go. He looked at Eleanor, and in his blue eyes she saw something she had never seen before. Peace. She forgave me, he said, before I even needed forgiveness. She knew I would find you someday. Eleanor moved closer, wrapping her arms around him. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Samuel's voice was thick with old grief and new healing. "You would have liked her, and she would have loved you." They held each other as the fire burned low and the stars emerged above the mountains. Two broken people who had found each other. Two wounded hearts learning to beat together. Two lives becoming one. 1 year later. Spring had returned to Copper Ridge with its usual fury of mud and wildflowers and screaming newborns. Eleanor was examining her last patient of the day, a 7-year-old boy who had scraped his knee climbing a tree that his mother had told him not to climb when the clinic door opened. Samuel walked in carrying a bundle of blankets. Inside the blankets, a baby slept peacefully. "She is hungry," Samuel said, with the slightly desperate expression of a father left alone with an infant for more than an hour. "And I have run out of ways to entertain her." Eleanor laughed, sending her young patient on his way with instructions to stay out of trees for at least a week. She took the baby from Samuel's arms and settled into her rocking chair. "Hello, my darling," she cooed. "Did your father bore you with his hunting stories again?" The baby opened her eyes. They were blue, the same startling shade of blue as Samuel's eyes, the same blue as the Montana sky on a summer morning. Martha Eleanor Blackwood was 3 months old. She had her father's eyes, her mother's determination, and a set of lungs that could wake the dead when she was hungry. She was perfect. Samuel sat beside them watching as Eleanor nursed their daughter. "I was thinking," he said slowly. "That sounds dangerous." He smiled, the smile that had once been so rare and was now becoming wonderfully common. "I was thinking about what we should do for her first birthday. We could have a party, invite the whole town. The whole town already treats her like royalty. Any more spoiling and she will become insufferable. That is what grandchildren are for." Eleanor laughed again. She looked around the clinic at the medical supplies on the shelves at the examination table where she had treated hundreds of patients at the certificate on the wall that certified her as the official physician of Copper Ridge. Clara Whitmore had made that certificate happen. She had lobbied the territorial legislature, donated money to the right campaigns, and pulled every string available until Montana became the first territory in the nation to grant medical licenses to women. Eleanor was the first woman to receive such a license. She suspected she would not be the last. Outside the window, Copper Ridge was bustling with activity. The town had doubled in size since the Whitmore Empire had fallen. New businesses had opened. New families had arrived. The mine was producing again safely and fairly under Clara's reformed management. It was not paradise. There were still hardships and conflicts and the occasional disaster. But it was a community, now, not a collection of frightened individuals living under a tyrant's thumb, and Eleanor was at the heart of it. Samuel followed her gaze. "Penny, for your thoughts. I was thinking about how far we have come." Eleanor stroked her daughter's downy hair. "A year ago I was a fugitive. I thought my life was over. I thought I would never practice medicine again, never love again, never be anything except a woman running from her past. And now I have a clinic, a husband, a daughter, a community that trusts me with their lives." She looked at Samuel. "Now I have everything I ever wanted, and things I never knew I needed." Samuel leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Martha would be happy," he said softly. "Both Marthas." "I hope so." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows and the sounds of the living town drifted in from outside. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, the terror of that night in Boston, the desperation of the train ride west, the fear and hope and love that had transformed a mail-order marriage into something real. She thought about the people she had saved and the people she had lost, about Thomas Blackwood dead at 16, finally vindicated after 24 years, about Dr. Crane who had found redemption in death, about Marcus Whitmore destroyed by the grief he could not overcome. She thought about her father, whose lessons had guided her through the darkest moments of her life, about Martha, whose letter had given Samuel permission to love again, about all the threads of fate that had woven together to create this moment. And she realized something she had not understood before. The past could not be erased. The wounds could not be fully healed. The scars would remain forever. But that was not the point. The point was to keep going, to find meaning in the struggle, to build something beautiful out of the wreckage of what was lost. The point was to live. That night, as Eleanor and Samuel sat on their cabin porch watching the stars emerge above the mountains, she said something she had been thinking for months. "I want to write it all down. Write what down? Everything. The epidemic. The raid on Whitmore's cellar. The night the town stood up for itself." She paused. "I want people to remember what happened here. I want them to know that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they find the courage to try." Samuel considered this. It would be a long story. The best stories always are. He smiled. "Then write it. Tell them about the doctor bride who came to Copper Ridge with nothing but a scalpel and a prayer. Tell them about the mountain man who learned to love again. Tell them about the town that refused to surrender." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "Tell them the truth." Eleanor looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there she knew were other women like her. Women with gifts and talents and dreams that society refused to recognize. Women who were told they could not, should not, must not. Maybe her story would reach one of them. Maybe it would give someone the courage to try. That was enough. That was more than enough. The fire crackled in the hearth. The baby slept peacefully in her cradle. The mountains stood sentinel around them, eternal and unchanging. And in the darkness of the Montana night, a woman who had once been called a murderer whispered a promise to the future. "I will tell them everything. I will make sure they never forget." The years passed. Eleanor delivered hundreds of babies. She set thousands of broken bones. She performed surgeries that would have been impossible anywhere else in the territory. She trained other women to assist her, and some of them went on to become doctors themselves. She lobbied for medical education and licensing reform. She wrote articles for medical journals that were rejected because of her gender and then accepted because of her results. She became a legend, not the kind of legend that appears in history books or monuments, the kind of legend that lives in the stories passed down from generation to generation, the kind that becomes part of a place's DNA woven into its very identity. Decades later, when Eleanor Blackwood was an old woman with silver hair and hands that still knew their way around a scalpel, a young reporter from the East, came to interview her about the early days of Montana Territory. She sat on the same porch where she had once watched the stars with Samuel, who had passed 5 years earlier peacefully in his sleep with her hand in his. The reporter asked about the epidemic, about Whitmore, about the raid on the cellar, and the night the town stood up for itself. Eleanor answered every question. She told the truth, the whole truth, leaving nothing out. When the interview was finished, the reporter asked one final question. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Eleanor thought about it for a long time. She thought about the terror of that first night on the train, clutching her father's surgical instruments like a lifeline. She thought about the desperation that had driven her to answer a mail-order bride advertisement. She thought about the fear and doubt and heartbreak that had marked so many of her days. Then she thought about Samuel, about Martha, about the clinic that still bore her name, about the 3 children and 7 grandchildren who called her mother and grandmother, about the hundreds of lives she had saved and the thousands more that had been saved by the people she had trained. "No," she said finally, "not a single thing." The reporter looked surprised. "Not even the suffering." The fear. The years of being hunted like a criminal. Eleanor smiled. "The suffering made me who I am. The fear taught me courage. The years of being hunted taught me that justice delayed is not justice denied." She looked out at the mountains that had been her home for more than half a century. "I came here with nothing but a scalpel and a prayer. I found a community, a purpose, and the love of my life." Her aged eyes sparkled with the same fire they had held on that first day in Copper Ridge. "I would not trade any of it for the world." The reporter nodded and closed his notebook. "One more question. The sign on your clinic, primum non nocere, first do no harm. Why did you choose those words?" Eleanor's smile softened. "My father wrote them in a notebook he gave me the day I graduated from medical school. He said they were the most important words in medicine." She paused. "But I think they are also the most important words in life. First, do no harm. Think before you act. Consider the consequences. Remember that every choice ripples outward, affecting lives you may never see." She reached for the silver locket she wore around her neck. Inside were 2 photographs, one of Samuel young and fierce, one of her father gentle and wise. We cannot always save everyone, but we can always choose not to add to the suffering. The reporter left, and Eleanor sat alone on her porch as the sun set behind the mountains. She thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and desperate, running from a crime she did not commit. She thought about the woman she had become, respected and loved, surrounded by family and community. She thought about the journey between those 2 points and all the people who had helped her along the way. Samuel, Martha, Hank Fletcher, Mary Dawson, Clara Whitmore, even Dr. Crane in his own tragic way. Even Marcus Whitmore, who had taught her that darkness can consume anyone and that the only defense against it is choosing light. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the town below. Children laughing, dogs barking, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer carried on by Hank Fletcher's grandson now, the sounds of life continuing on generation after generation. This was her legacy. Not the clinic, though, that would endure for decades after her death. Not the medical advances, though those would save countless lives. Her legacy was simpler and more profound than any of that. Her legacy was a community that had learned to stand together, a town that had discovered its own courage, a people who had refused to surrender to fear and hatred and greed. That was what she would leave behind. That was enough. That was everything. And as the stars emerged above the mountains of Montana, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, the doctor bride of Copper Ridge, smiled and whispered a final prayer of thanksgiving for the life she had lived, for the love she had found, for the chance to make a difference in a world that so desperately needed it, and for the knowledge that her story would live on, inspiring others to find their own courage, their own strength, their own way, forever and always. Amen.